as I have, there's one trait of his which has rubbed off on me more than any other.
He says you're good.
What's that?
That's the
Oh.
executive session.
Yeah, we're going to try it.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. I gotta turn that.
You're actually going to use it?
Meetings get boring, man. You gotta figure out how to adjust that. Go fast. There you go. Well, I mean, there's a green one. I think I'll get the green one. I'll never change it out for green one. Already? Yeah, it's just kind of hard to see. Like, always do this. Hey, this thing has a Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. There we go. We're good to go. Okay. Are we ready? Yeah, you never know how to type a text. They said the 100.
Oh, okay, it's a new resolution.
Oh, okay.
7-2 that came today.
Everybody ready? Okay. Let me just kind of get organized here a minute.
7.2.
All right, it is 4 o'clock, or-ish, 4 o'clock-ish. We'll go ahead and call our November 10th meeting to order. If we could get a roll call, please.
Mayor Householder.
Here.
Commissioner Blanchard.
Here.
Commissioner Crawford. Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Hardy.
Here.
At this time, all who are able, if you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have no awards and proclamations today, so that'll move us into our citizens forum part of the meeting. This is an opportunity for anyone to come up and speak regarding an item that is not on the agenda. Be sure to please give your name and address. No? No one? Okay. We'll move on down. We have no public hearings scheduled for a certain time, so we'll go to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of November 3rd, 2014. Item 6.2, award of contract for the water main replacement project Phase 3, project number 10-2842B to Nowak Construction Company Incorporated in the amount of $1,436,000 with a 5% construction contingency of $74,950. Item 6.3, authorize the mayor to sign a contract with Caw Valley Engineering to design the replacement of Greeley Avenue Bridge, project number 08-2709.
Is there any item that a commissioner would like to remove or amend from the consent agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the consent agenda as read.
Second.
No hurrah for the Greeley Street Bridge? Nothing? Anyone? Clap? Anything? Okay. Okay, if there's no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? That motion carries 4-0. We look forward to that bridge. I'll make the hoorah comment. That's exciting news. Administration.
Item 7.1, first reading ordinance number 14-10755, levying Salina Business Improvement District Number 1 service fees for 2015 in accordance with KSA 12-1791.
Mr. Franz, I believe.
Kansas state law governs the procedure for the creation and financing of one or more business improvement districts within cities for the purpose of providing administration and financing of additional and extended services for businesses within those districts. These services are intended to restore, promote economic vitality of the district and the general welfare of the city, financing the BID through service fees applicable to all businesses within the district, In 1983, City Commission approved the creation of Salina Business Improvement District Number 1, covering certain downtown areas of Salina along with the associated service fees. That concept of self-governance for downtown has continued for the past 28 years. Cities may provide BID services directly through city employees or by contract with a not-for-profit corporation. From 1983 to 1987, the city directed BID programs and services, and since that time, that administrative task has been delegated to Salina Downtown, Inc., which is not-for-profit advocacy and marketing organization. State law provides for each BID to have a city-appointed board of advisors who may also serve as a board for the not-for-profit corporation. In Salina, the SDI and the BID boards are made up of the same individuals serving in dual roles. SDI provides for annual elections to the board, and the City Commission has chosen to use those BID results in its appointment processes to help assure the Board of Advisors is made up of a broad base of persons representing downtown businesses. BID program of services is financed through a service fee on businesses within the district. It's important to note that the BID fees cannot be levied on buildings, owners, or properties under state law. These annual service fees are mandatory payments as established by city ordinance, as a City of Salina fee is billed and collected by the city's finance department with the assistance of BID staff. A preliminary SDI 2015 budget was presented to the city in May and considered as a part of the city's annual budget process. The BID SDI board recommended no change from last year's fees as a part of that budget. Their budget delineates projected expenditures for downtown service operations as well as business support and recruitment, communications, advocacy, and destination marketing, with oversight by committees comprised of downtown business representatives. The budget, as requested, included $83,000 in fee revenues, an operating supplement of $38,000, a one-time capital grant of $12,000 to provide banner supports on downtown light poles. The City Commission authorized the budget with the caveat that a general fee increase be considered for 2015 in order to maintain parity with inflationary pressures. Ordinance number 1410-755 incorporates that direction, providing a 2% general fee increase over 2014. Fee schedules recommended should provide fee stability. I think historically they've collected about $83,000, at least in recent years. 2% increase would be, just a bit more than that, maybe 85,000, provided collection rates stayed the same. I think at that point I would stand for questions for Mr. Gage, since he's the real expert on this.
Okay. All right. Any questions for staff?
I was wondering, are any of these fees allocated for downtown plantings?
I don't believe so. Those are done primarily by the city and their support for the area through the downtown section of our Parks Department. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's correct.
The city provides the fees come in, and then the city's general $38,000 that comes in go in essence to the funding pot for BID, and then they allocate those through their budgetary process. So we don't earmark those dollars. The only dollars that we really earmarked would be the facade grant dollars. In this case, we had the arms on the new lights for the banners.
Seems like we're always struggling with that area, whether it's enough staffing to take care of the watering or planting or all of that. And I was just curious about the best. I think it's important for downtown to look pleasant, and so I was just wondering what the best avenue to have that accomplished, rather than just hoping that it gets done and we go from year to year without seeing any improvement, really.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of options. The first thing is from a SDI BID perspective, they would maybe want to go through, if they haven't already, some service prioritization of, they probably have done that in some form, but what's most important from their perspective to spend their money on utilizing existing funds would be a good exercise to go to, probably one they've gone through before. If the end result is, well, there just aren't enough funds and this just isn't the highest priority compared to all the other things that use up the existing dollars, then the next question is where would those funds come from to do that? Well, fairly significant fee increase could get you there. Certainly a request for the city to provide more general fund money into the function could get you there. Those are a couple options. Or if you can generate additional partner funds from folks that aren't in the service area but for some reason have a good, strong relationship and wish to partner, I suppose that's an opportunity, but it may be very limited. So those are kind of probably the options that are out there available. Absent grants, if there are any particular grants, that would be satisfactory as well. But generally speaking, it's hard to get grants for operational and maintenance type activities.
Okay.
I had a question about the revenue generated from these fees. Historically, has there been, do we know where we are, we know dollar-wise, but do we keep track of business-wise or entity-wise how many members of the BID are contributing to this fee structure? And then also, the second part of that question would be, over the last several years, I know that we tend to have a few more businesses in the BID that are tax-exempt type entities, not for profits. And what is there pressure from those, or is it just sort of averaged out in the course of all the other businesses that participate?
Well, I cannot answer directly the question about the not-for-profits. I have not looked at that. I do know that the fees are billed out through the city's accounts receivable program. We collect the money and then pass that on to SDI. And we do have a relatively aggressive collection program. We use the services of a local attorney to pursue accounts that are unpaid.
Yeah, Commissioner.
And do get some collections on that. So
one thing to keep in mind, the Salina Downtown Inc., the nonprofit arm, there are members to that, but from a BID service fee perspective, there are not members. What happens is the state defines, or state law defines, a business activity, and so within the district, all entities where there's a business activity are subject to some level of fees. That even includes vacant buildings, and so. You are correct in that a not-for-profit is really the only thing I can think of that's really a type of entity or activity that's exempted from that. And I know in past years there has been discussion with the BID about some concern about the financial impact of not-for-profits down in the downtown. When you think about it from the perspective of the growth of the fee in the downtown, the rates have been, except for these minor increases, but have been pretty much the same as far as methodology for quite a few years. So there hasn't been a major methodology switch for many years. The fee has increased, the collections have increased, but pretty slowly, actually. So I don't know if that's a result of a change in not-for-profits being downtown or not, and perhaps Melissa Rose Hodges could tell us if she feels like it's increased. I don't know if they've tracked it that closely, but it's a possibility.
Yeah. I would say, if my memory serves me correctly, 20 years ago, the total fees were on the order of $75,000 a year. And I remember because that's when I came on board roughly, and I remember that's what we got. It was about 75, and it's now about 85.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's pretty slow growth. Now, keep in mind a few things. The vacancy rate's going to be the biggest factor there, or the type of business, because, well, where the business is located, because we have the Santa Fe district, which is a front footage calculation, and then upstairs and away from that, we have the employment district, which is based on number of employees. And like I said, those methodologies have been in place since you've heard of the PUMA plan in the early 2000s. That's been the same for that time. So in essence, if businesses are prospering more and they're spending more money, that wouldn't necessarily affect their fee. If they're in the employment district and they add more employees, then that could increase the collections. So that's one factor that could increase it. If your business in the Santa Fe district, is all about front footage. So if with the front footage, and there's a vacant or not, you're going to collect a certain fee. So that really there wouldn't be much impact in the Santa Fe district.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay. Thank you, Rod. Melissa, did you have anything for us at all?
If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Hodges at all?
And going back to what Rod said, I mean, we do keep track of the businesses that are downtown. We have a list of the businesses that are active and the ones that have closed, so I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on that. And yes, we don't collect service fees from the nonprofits. So in terms of whether the number of nonprofits has grown or declined, my sense is that it's grown somewhat since the BID was first introduced. And yeah, our revenues from the BID service fees are generally like, maybe 83 on a good year. I think we generally budget between 83 and 85, and I think the last couple of years we've been coming in closer to like the $80,000-$81,000 figure. So yeah, when you look at it, if when Rod came here that it was 75, we really haven't grown that budget a whole lot.
If, say for instance, we all do really well and we're able to re-energize a lot of the downtown and realize some sort of increase in occupancy down there,
right.
And some of those vacancies tend to decrease. Would we be looking at perhaps a scenario where we would across the board be lowering the fees because we'd be broadening the base of that?
I think I'd want to be in a position that we were.
I mean,
I can't speak for the city, but I mean, I would want to be in a position where, we were really generating excess fees in terms of, oh my gosh, look at this. In 2016, we've generated $100,000. I mean, then I think that would be the time to have that conversation. I mean, definitely. I mean, if everything were so full and we couldn't spend money, but at least if I were still there, we'd be spending money. So
because the budget, the budget may increase a little bit more.
I can always spend money. Yeah.
The budget may increase a little bit more, but there may be opportunities there to sort of stabilize or even lower that.
It all depends on, I think, what the city's expectation is for the outcomes in the downtown with the presence of the BID combined with the SDI, what their board's expectations are, and what resources it takes to meet those expectations. And if you could meet whatever those are with fewer funds or less funds, then yeah. If you can't, then probably would be a decision not to change that.
Yeah. And just this follow-up question, this for staff is that since this BID is a city-appointed board, so to speak, what do we have in place that we kind of have some sort of accountability that a lot of the vision of that particular board is in sync with, our overall comprehensive plan and strategic plans as a city? Is there any assurance that we have there that we're kind of all on the same page, or?
I would say there's not assurance in the sense that there's not a contractual requirement or any requirement tied to the funds that says you have to follow this, that, or the other. What I do think, though, is that in time our comprehensive plan and some of our other planning documents, the PUMA plan is the most common one referenced in the downtown, were an expression of the vision of the city as well as the downtown. So I think that both entities have kind of, for the most part, walked down the same sidewalk or driven down the same road for that time. But there isn't a formal requirement that says if you receive these funds you need to follow this or that or anything like that.
Okay.
And just going back to what Commissioner Hardy had asked, the Parks Department very generously funds a full-time downtown person. And we've done some looking in terms of, what does it take to get to be like a Manhattan or a Lawrence or some of the other streetscapes that we really admire, and it requires a lot more dollars. I mean, that's just the plain and simple thing. I mean, we're getting a lot for for what we devote in our budget to downtown. I mean, we have basically a full-time person down here. But if you want to see some of the kinds of really outstanding planters. I mean, it all comes down to money, and I'm not sure where the city, is really looking to expand park staff at this point. But I would always encourage you to expand park staff because I know they're really shorthanded, and that's why we have what we have.
So are you saying, though, that we are short staff and short money?
I'd say it's mostly a staffing issue, just because if you've got one person that is responsible for sweeping out all of the arcades, cleaning all of the bathrooms, sweeping out the plazas. I know that our president employee, by the time that he makes his rounds doing that, there's really not time to take care of the landscape. So, at any rate, I mean, I know Parks has suffered cuts in the past, so I hate to be too greedy in asking for more and more and more, but when you look at our budget maybe being like, whatever, like $75,000 from Parks devoted to downtown, and then you go to a Lawrence where it's $250,000. I mean, how can you compare that? You can't. I mean, Lawrence has like 3 full-time people downtown, and that's the kind of result that you get, is when you dedicate those resources. So, I mean, it is what it is.
I see trustees mowing the grass around here. Is that a proper use of trustees?
What we have here is a failure to communicate.
Yeah. Commissioner, I assume it could be. It certainly, that would be up to the sheriff to release the trustees, and then there's a question of supervision and so forth. And like you say, the ones that you see around here have been given quite a bit of discretion, done a really good job with the jobs they've been given. So I assume there might be possibility for that, if that's what everyone would want to.
Well, it's always a little fearful, though, to see. I mean, I get where you're going with this, but I'm not sure that the average shopper downtown would be excited about seeing a DOC, bright orange outfit.
We have used people that need to get community service hours, but they haven't actually been, in the jail. I mean, they're basically doing their community service hours as part of their sentence. And, they've done a great job. I mean, I can't speak highly enough about the people that have opted to volunteer for downtown Salina.
I like the chain gang idea, but I'm just a little, getting into word. Maybe the side streets. Maybe that's it. Okay, anyone from the public have any questions or comments on this?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ray Ruska, 235 North Santa Fe. How are you today?
Good. We're good.
Oh, you are? Good, great.
A little hungry, actually. I didn't get much for lunch, but since you asked.
All right. As far as Melissa's question about, or Mr. Hardy's question about getting these orange coats out there, cleaning up around the neighborhood, they already do that. I've got an alley over there on Santa Fe that they come over there and cut the weeds in my alley cutout. They've been doing that for years.
Huh.
So that's not something new.
There you go.
I just wanted to point that out. When Rod France brought his background information up, he commented that this downtown BID has continued for the past 28 years. Well, I think there's a little error in addition or subtraction there. It started in '83 and this is 14, so that's 31 years. Each year, the ordinance is replaced with a new and then previous is repealed. You understand that, right? The one right now, the old one's going to be repealed. Service fees or an ordinance changes to the body is determined by the advisory board created by ordinance 838971, not 838979. The first ordinance was in August. The 89 ordinance was in October. So we've been going along here repealing or basing our repeals on 31 years of repeal, or basing it on an incorrect ordinance. That's one part of it. I'll save the best for last. And I'd like the commission to kind of follow along with me on the ordinance that you're getting ready to replace and repeal. Go to section 10. Is everybody there?
John has his memorized.
Now, I just wish if you'd make your point.
Well, I'm going to make my point. I'm going to spell it out to you so you can understand it. If you don't want to follow on,
No,
that's fine.
go ahead. Yeah.
Section 10 should be eliminated. And it says in section 10E, no civil judgment shall bar or prevent a criminal prosecution for each and every violation of this ordinance. The only way I know you can violate this ordinance is if you don't pay them. Or maybe the other option is if you don't claim all the employees you've got, that is a written request from the BID. My point is, how can a civil judgment become a criminal prosecution? They're including the word criminal in there, so they should probably remove that entire section. And also, on section 11, which follows up with that, any person convicted of violating this ordinance shall be fined no greater than $500. Okay, are we going to turn it into a debtor prison for failure to pay a debt? It's going to turn it into a criminal violation? Makes no sense. The ordinance is reset every year. So should the billing be sent, billing and everyone invoiced instead, well, wait a minute here. Should the billing be sent to everyone and an invoice instead of a statement? Even if you are an existing business from the previous year, statements are sent. And then the follow-up on the last point here, and I've addressed this issue with Jason. He's failed to answer this question. I thought he would, but I could have asked him personally, but...
Can we stick to the issue, please?
Mr. Blanchard, I have the floor, and I'm talking in public.
Sir,
At our
I'll tell you
leisure.
what,
At our
we don't
leisure.
need the commentary on to whether or not you think this city manager has adequately addressed your issues. I'm aware of those issues, and quite frankly, I feel that they've been adequately addressed.
Well,
So please stick with the issue on the ordinance.
the issue on the ordinance is the first point I brought up. We're talking about an ordinance. The original ordinance was 83, 89, 71, and they're repealing or addressing it on every one of the repeals since day one of 83, 89, 79. But there brings another follow-up point to this. In 2007, the ordinance to assign the lead district a name for the lead district was presented, and it used the 8979 ordinance as the basis. And the issue that's in effect right now is that this ordinance that was supposed to include the name lead district was not even signed by the mayor. It was voided. And so is everything all the way up to that point or after that point, as far as the lead district is concerned, where they're calling it the lead district, is that any kind of an issue other than failure to perform their duties? Does
Mr.
anyone
Ruska?
have any questions about this issue?
Can you help us with helping everyone here and at home understand that if what happens legally, with your legal background, what happens if the mayor doesn't sign the ordinance? Can you tell us exactly what that means?
I don't have any legal background at all with that. I asked you that question. I did not get an answer.
Okay, so, I mean, was that, you're just bringing that to our attention?
Well, I think the attention needs to be brought up that they've been repealing, and the basic question is the advisory board was created by ordinance 83, 89, 71. Every ordinance after that used the number 89, 79.
Okay.
So if you create something with a different number, how does it continue on after that point?
Okay, so just so we have, I mean, is that it? I mean, I'll go to legal after this. I mean, if you're done with yours, then because I don't want this to get into rebuttal as it sometimes does. So, I mean, if you've got that, I'll try and seek what I can.
Well, that question and voting an ordinance without a signature, and I actually went back and looked at the minutes surrounding that area of 2007 about the voided issue about the lead district, and there is nothing ever said about it in the minutes, of being able to pass it or not pass it or anything.
Okay, well, I'll see what I can find out on a couple of issues that may be of interest. I would gather, at least on your last issue, and again, if you're done, because I don't want this to,
Yeah, go ahead. I can
Perhaps-
answer.
if you could sit, because I don't want this to be a
Mr.
back
Mayor.
and forth thing.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me. Perhaps can we hear from other public things, and then we can close it and then bring
Sure, that might be
questions back to
good.
the...
Okay, that might be a good idea.
Would this be an opportunity to address the issue?
Well, maybe. I mean,
Well,
but I just want to make sure you're done before we start on it.
Well,
So-
does anyone else want to talk about this?
Well, we'll still have you set because we're not going to get into a debate here, so,
I'm not in a debate.
okay. Okay, is there anyone else who has anything that they want to bring up on this issue? Okay. I would gather my
Mi-
limited...
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, this is
Mr.
what-
Mayor, may I, please?
Okay,
May I ask that we close the public hearing and then discuss this?
good
Allow a
plan.
motion to be made.
Good plan, okay, well, we'll go ahead and close the public discussion, good idea.
Thank you.
So then what I would gather is if a mayor, these little forums, as powerful as we like to feel that we are up here, I would gather that if there's a majority decision, my signature truly is not required, that it is simply as if maybe it's maybe a Greg question, is that?
I'd be happy to address that.
Sure.
In a city of the first class under the the commission manager form of government, as we are, the mayor's signature on an ordinance is more of a ministerial act, has actually no legal consequences to the action in enacting the ordinance. So.
Okay. So I think that clearly spells out, as usual, I have no power, but, except to call restroom breaks occasionally, which is my
That's the extent of your fiat, yes.
Okay, so that brings that almighty grassy knoll gunman theory to an end. So now let's take a look at this other item. If we're truly perhaps using the wrong number, if this is indeed the case, I assume that there is some legislation that spells out that, I mean, I don't think this null and voids the entire thing and we can all get rid of our driver's license and start driving around Freeman. I don't think that probably puts us in too much of a dilemma, does it?
If I may ask,
Don't ask over there.
I understand the dilemma, but I don't know how to address this without some clarification as to whether the purported error in numbering is in the second whereas, where the phrase is said located within the BID as established by Ordinance 83, 89, 79. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the 71. Where is the 71?
I believe
I'm not sure where the purported error in reference
Yeah, I'm
to an
seeing
ordinance is.
the reference 83 that I see 12, 1791. I don't see a 71 anywhere. 7055, that's today's.
I believe he's stating that it should reference ordinance 83-8971. Is that correct?
Yeah, that
You
would,
can nod. Is that correct? Can you do that? It's okay. I'm pretty
well, then,
sure.
All right, then we'll-
perhaps we should just move on.
That's
Yeah, we'll
okay.
move
Yeah,
on.
it must not be relevant.
Yeah, if there's a real legal issue, I'm sure it'll come back before us, but we'll,
Could I ask one question, and it may not to speak for Mr. Ruska, but is there a reason this historically has not been just set up as an ongoing fee structure as opposed to redoing this every year?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I didn't hear the first part of your
Sorry.
question.
Yeah. Is there a reason that this has not been set up just as an ongoing, fee structure, just like, license tag renewal, as opposed to bringing it back and basically starting from fresh each year?
Yes, the statutory requirements related to the Business Improvement District do anticipate an annual levy. There's a scenario that you would not have reason to have observed. There is a submission of a budget, I believe May 15th is the deadline, that leads toward the development of the proposed assessment. That scenario occurs annually, leading toward this annual levy of the assessment.
Makes sense. Thank you.
okay. Okay, any further discussion on this? Then I'd entertain a motion, if not.
Mr. Mayor, move approval in first reading ordinance number 14-10755.
Second.
Motion is second to approve ordinance number 14-10755. Any further discussion from this board? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries 4-0.
Item 7.2, resolution number 14-7150, authorizing the mayor to execute a guaranteed maximum price amendment with McCown Gordon LLC, establishing a project contingency for the Salina Bicentennial Center construction project.
Dion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Piece of housekeeping first. There's a new resolution that Shandy would have passed out to you. Basically, the change on that is it includes the construction contingency or the project contingency. That's the only difference from the other one, but wanted to make that note. Based on direction we received at the last meeting, we have tried to incorporate that into the newest GMP, which you see in front of you. We've come to terms with McCown Gordon on a couple outstanding issues that we were negotiating through and have presented you with what we believe to be a final packet for the project. The long and short of it, I'll give you a few of the overalls. Right now, the total construction cost would come in at $10,553,974. You've got $1,130,000 in owner's equipment and FF&Es. You've got about $790,000, $894,000 in professional fees and insurance, and then the contingency of $426,440, which brings you to $12,930,8, plus roughly $400,000 for your interest costs and closing pieces there. So. We have provided a little bit of detail on how that breaks out in the different parts there. We've also included the actual GMP document within, or GMP amendment within your packet as well. And with that, I would stand for questions.
Okay, any questions for staff on this?
Is this price, this last price, this 12, whatever it is, without looking at this, is that with all of the alt ads?
Correct.
Okay. And does that also include the air handling special equipment?
It does.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Okay, easy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone from the public care to comment on this? Sure, of course. I knew you were here for that, so.
I've been watching these proceedings on TV, and as I recall, it started out as a project to reinforce the roof and structural stability of that, the trusses and so forth, so you could hang heavier loads, curtains and so forth from it.
Sir, can we get a name and address, please,
I'm
for the
sorry.
record?
Yeah.
And
Sir?
now it's progressed to I don't know how many different projects.
For the at-home players, could you give us your
What's
name?
that?
Can we, for the record, for the clerk, please get your name and address, sir?
I can't hear you hardly.
Can we get your name and address for the city clerk for the records, please?
I'm Dale Martinez, and I live at
Thank you.
206 South Estates Drive. I'm a retired and tired engineer.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, we just had to have that for them. Go ahead.
When that was erected some 40 years ago, why the roof came down more than what they expected, it deflected, and the project was milked every way structurally to save on steel and so forth. So you have a weak roof there, and as I recall, it's only designed for about 10 pounds ice and snow. So you see the city crew out there shoveling snow once in a while. They're apparently aware of it. So I've never seen in any of these meetings you address that, and that's what it started to be, as I remember. So I'd like to hear your response.
Sure, thank you. I think that kind of early on was one of the first things we did, but Jason, I mean, maybe you could explain a little better on that.
Yeah, the intent many years ago was to look at the whole facility, and you'll remember not about 3 or 4 years ago, time flies, we addressed Heritage Hall and the upstairs meeting rooms, and the intent was to, because what happened is we had a facility that's completely age dated and doesn't really meet the needs entirely. And certainly one aspect of that is the structural steel of the roof. That's a component of the project, but it was never a standalone project. It was always part of a comprehensive project to update the whole building, because it's pretty much been the same for the most part for 30 plus years.
And Dion, could you maybe point to me a section in here? I know there's a section in here about that the metal work was, what section that is? Was this?
If you look at the rigging steel allowance, which is on page 2 of your blue sheet, right there, there's $1,080,000 set aside for the steel.
Right. Okay.
So you are going to reinforce those trusses?
Yes, of course. Yeah. He could probably hear you better there. Yeah.
We've looked at it a couple different ways from an engineering standpoint. They're actually going to build a standalone piece that will be used as a grid for the rigging. So it will take the load off of the roof and transfer it just to this to let the roof just be the roof. Where we've had the trouble and what the early report showed us from the engineers, and I don't want to claim to say that I fully understand all the pieces that they put into it, but the long and short of it was when we start hanging things from the roof and we have a snow load, that's a problem.
Right.
So we're eliminating hanging things from the roof because it would have a standalone grid. That's the new approach that we're taking with this package.
So theoretically, the roof will have less stress than during concerts than it's ever had before. So
Correct.
Does that make sense? Maybe a little bit. Yeah.
Well, you're not beefing up the trusses then?
Not on the roof structure itself. We looked at that, and we're not able to.
But you're eliminating load.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
They'll no longer hang anything from the ceiling. It'll be a whole new structure.
Yeah.
But
the short of it is, Commissioners, when we really looked at that, and we had a third-party structural engineer take a look at that, the cost estimates to reinforce the entire roof steel system, the rigging system, came in over $2 million.
Right.
And so we said that's more than we really feel that we would like to spend on that. And so that's when the design team started looking at various alternatives and came up with a standalone, which says, again, for all the stuff you would hang for a show, let's hang it on a standalone steel rigged system and not in the roof structure. So the roof structure will just be the roof structure. We'll have a standalone rigging system for events. And that is the number estimate is in there as a holding place for you.
Okay.
So that's what caused us to go to that.
great, thank you. And it's a good question because I know that's a concern. We've talked about that before, so I appreciate that. So anyone else on the Bison? It's $13 million.
Just ask a follow-up question. With the weight not pulling down on the roof is still strong enough to withstand heavy snow load?
Yeah, and I don't want to claim that I know exactly how much snow it can withstand. But we are definitely reducing the load on it because we're not hanging anything from it. So in theory, we're taking away from the stress that would be on it. I couldn't tell you what the snow load would be at this point for that, but I do know that we did have a lot of concerns, and Ron would be the first to tell you, if there's any snow and we have a show in there, that it causes them stress because when you're getting up close to it, to have to cancel an event would be a really, really big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Commissioners, one thing to keep in mind is a few years ago, we removed the original large center scoreboard, which provided significant weight in the middle of that. That had been there, I assume, since pretty much back to the original building construction. So that was removed, and in its place we have a couple scoreboards on the walls. And so, quite honestly, in the future, if there's any desire or any plans to hang anything from the roof, we'll go back to the third-party engineering report to see if in fact there's capacity to do that. So we have a good baseline report now that wasn't available before, and we have a good handle on the what the roof can and can't do.
Great.
Part of this, too, just a little caveat would be, what we have to do now is we have to do what's called bridling, and Ron could give you a better example of that, but everything's bridled, which really reduces what you can use the members for. When you have the new system, it disperses the load more evenly, so you have a lot of different points from which you can hang, and that makes a big, big difference. Right now, everything that we do, I think, is bridling, and Ron could probably talk to that a little bit more if you wanted some detail on that.
And just a quick question, and Ron may be able to answer some of this too, but just since we're going to be getting into this process, can you give us just an overview of the timelines? We had it in there in our critical path last time, but can you just briefly, for people that may be going to events here, kind of give an idea of a timeline and what sort of disruptions, if any, they might experience?
Great question. And right now, 9.5 months is the allotted time to complete the project based on the scope we have. If you saw last month, it was last week, sorry, it was 8.5. We added some scope with the ad alternates. Have tried to slot stuff in. That's been in a really moving target, because as Global Spectrum is trying to book shows and put things in there, we also have to take into account, hey, what's that going to do to the different pieces that we're overhauling, retrofitting, whatever it may be, renovating, etc. So to answer the question, I think there will be some shows where we will have some construction that is going on, but one of the things that led us towards McCown Gordon is they're talking about a lot of the facilities where they have had to be open during renovations, such as hospitals, such as other pavilions, such as different types of facilities that require that same level of ability to use, yet at the same time not restrict the construction. So that was one of the things that led us to them as well. Ron can speak probably in greater detail if you want to hear him talk just a little bit about the scheduling, but there's hours and hours and hours invested in just the scheduling piece, trying to find that balance where we're still bringing in events, but at the same time, we're not creating a drag on construction where we increase the process or the scope, if you will, and the time creeps out and it costs us dollars. So, again, it was a juggling act and a balancing piece, but that was the goal all along, was to try to find that happy medium where we could, again, continue to operate shows, but yet at the same time, hit those construction windows. And I'll let Ron speak a little more.
Okay, great.
Hello, good evening. Obviously, very important for us to maintain the relationship with the clients and the customers and the patrons that attend our events. So we're very sensitive, or at least I am extremely sensitive to the way that they will perceive the building and some of the stuff that will happen. But I also look at it on the flip side, that somebody will be able to come in and maybe only half the wall is painted as we have to stop for an event that day, and they can see what it's going to become, and they can see into the future. So the intent is to minimize as best as possible any kind of construction stuff. I mean, McCown has been a very good partner to this point. We've had a ton of conversations regarding that, as far as putting fencing up or screening off areas and then being able to adjust it based on event needs and do different things like that. So we're really trying to minimize that, but at the same point, I think showcasing some of it as a kind of a stepping stone into the future is equally as important.
Okay, so we're going to have some sort of graphics there that kind of show people, hey, this is what's coming type.
Yeah, we talked about some of that, not just the renovations coming, but maybe have a rendering of some of the things that we have seen on the projector, or doing some of those sorts of things to help really focus on routing people in the right direction. By no means do I think people should be scared off from coming to our events during this time period. I think it should be something people want to come to be able to see some of the other things that are going on in the building today, and how that will look when the whole project is kind of buttoned up at the end of this.
Great. Okay.
Do you have any, just shooting from the hip, estimates of what percentage this will allow you to, or increase revenues you'll realize once it's all said and done? 2 years out, 3 years out.
I don't have a percentage to give you, or a qualitative number that we can look towards, but I think the city manager said it best. I mean, it's a facility that's structurally sound, that just needs life, and that was done with some of the renovations in the past, with some of the other buildings. But really hard to for the community to have a lot of pride in a building that's leaking from the roof, and some of those things just need to be updated. Some of the very basic functions of the facility just need some life, and then a lot of the other areas are aesthetic things that I think people will really see the value in and want to come back and help support. So I do think that we'll attract more people and more interest, hopefully all positive, but in time I think it's something that will only grow and be better and better as we move forward.
Great.
There'll be an increase in fun factor.
Fun factor, there you go.
Well, I think some people are concerned, though, obviously, how we pay for it, and one way, obviously, is increased bookings. But it's not going to happen overnight.
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say the one thing I would point out, too, is just really a lot of this stuff, there are some aesthetic components to it, but a lot of this stuff is pure maintenance that's been overlooked for, I don't know,
Decades.
10, 15, 20 years. I mean, so, redoing the roof structure, I mean, that's obviously not a cosmetic. That's a needed thing. Repaving a parking lot, that's a needed thing. Some of it's cosmetic. We want to be proud of our buildings. But I think, a lot of this money is truly going to core components, the kitchen, making it to where it's effective. So we don't want to overlook that either. There been steps along the way to maintain our buildings, which is something I think this commission's been conscious of on other projects, is that this bill wouldn't have been quite this high. We would have had a lot less ad alternates, if you will. So.
Well, and I would encourage as much marketing as we can, because I know that Visit Salina works a lot with basketball tournaments that are coming up, and we're always looking to recruit new events into the community. I think it's a good opportunity when the caution tape is up and hard hats are around the building to kind of generate some excitement about the new things that are coming. So I think there is a good opportunity for us to use it sort of as a marketing tool for new groups and existing ones as well that are going to be using it during that process. So and also I always comment to you on how good the hospitality is there, and I think that during the reconstruction mode, I think that's doubly important, is that the hospitality is cranked up even to a higher level than it's already current high level. So
we agree.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the public? Sure, come.
To summarize, what I hear you're saying is your design structural engineer did not review the structural analysis of that roof. And so it's, is that correct?
A third-party structural engineer did fully review and analyze the structural integrity of the existing steel girder roof system. And from that information, the designers for the project estimated a cost that would be in excess of $2 million to use that approach to reinforce the roof structure. And they did determine that the roof, basically what you'd mentioned, without any changes to the existing structure, we really shouldn't be hanging a significant heavy load. And as shows become larger and as time goes on, they get heavier and heavier. And certainly there was always a concern about a heavy snow load and a heavy show at the same time. So because of the cost estimate being over $2 million, the designers went back and they said, okay, is there an approach where we can isolate the weight of the shows on a separate steel system? And that's what they did. So the plan will be to have construct a separate steel cantilevered system to take on the weight of the shows and no longer have the weight of the shows in the future be on the roof structure.
So there was no attempt to increase the 10-pound allowable snow load?
No.
Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, I think the structural engineer's report indicated not so much a concern with the snow by itself, but a heavy snow load with the weight of the shows, and so that's why the focus was on the shows.
Yeah, I don't like to be in that building when there's snow, and then I don't like to be in there because of the restrooms. They're atrocious.
Well, we are fixing those. We are fixing those for you. Yes. There's something for everybody. There you go. Great. So again, just to clarify for anybody at home, we did have a third party check out the roof structure. We looked at two options. We opted for the lesser expensive option, but one that we actually think works fine in our situation. So
yeah, the structural engineers determined that a separate steel structured system to handle the weights of the events is satisfactory. And so none of that load will be on the existing roof structure. And that was all based on an initial third-party engineer's analysis of the steel rigging, the capacity of the steel rigging, and then on the planning of, well, what do we do in the future when we have a heavy snow and we have a heavy show and that type of question. And so that was the most cost-effective approach.
Okay. Anyone else from the public on this issue at all? Okay. Thanks for coming out with your comments. Then I guess I'd bring it back to the commission for possible action.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve resolution number 14-7150, authorizing the mayor to execute the GMP amendment with McCown Gordon Construction LLC and establish a construction project contingency for the Salina Bicentennial Center construction project pursuant to code section 2-236 in the amount of $426,440, and authorize the city manager to approve change orders with the amount of the contingency that are not prompted by a change in the size and scope of the project.
Second.
Motion is second to adopt resolution number 14-7150. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? That motion carries 4-0. Takes us
Item 7.3, resolution number 14-7151, levying a transient guest tax upon the gross receipts for sleeping accommodations within the city of Salina and amending resolution number 09-6647.
Mr. Franz.
Mayor and Commissioners, thank you. The City of Salina has had a long-standing transient guest tax at the rate of 5%. Historically, traditionally, 60% of that has been allocated to visit Salina for the marketing of the community and other activities designed to promote tourism and overnight stays. 40% has been used to offset the cost of operation of the Bicentennial Center. That is where a significant portion of the operating subsidy has come from for that facility. In October 2009, that tax was increased to 6.7% with the increment of 1.7% assigned to two purposes. 0.7% was assigned to be used for cultural marketing and for marketing of the Oakdale-Kenwood Park area. That portion of the increment was not assigned a sunset date. It was a permanent change, absent action of the City Commission to change it. Of course, you could change it at any time by resolution if you desire. 1% was assigned to make capital improvements to the Bicentennial Center. That portion was assigned a sunset date of 10 years on September 31st, 2019. That 1 cent portion has been allocated towards debt service on the bonds used to improve the Heritage Hall portion of the Bicentennial Center, which was done shortly, in 2009-2010 timeframe. As we proceed with further upgrades to the Bicentennial Center, it's apparent that a non-property tax source of funding for a portion of those improvement costs may be desirable. Transient guest tax is one way to accomplish that. 20-year extension to the tax would provide significant resources towards a project from non-property tax sources contributed by the guests to the community. If desired, it's also possible to extend the tax indefinitely without a sunset provision. This would be consistent with the balance of the tax. The City Commission or future commissions, of course, could change that by resolution at their discretion. 1 cent tax is expected to provide about $247,000 per year starting in 2020. This would be sufficient to provide about 1/4 of the projected annual payment on the bonds. As another point of comparison, the entire package of the ad alternates to the baseline project would cost about $200,000 per year over the term of the bonds. The baseline project is currently programmed into the property tax resources into the capital improvements program. Potential actions would be to approve the resolution as submitted, which would provide for a 20-year extension to the tax, and the way that is written That would be for the entire tax, would sunset after 20 years. That could be modified to provide an indefinite extension to the 1% tax, or you, of course, could take no action and leave the tax as it stands now. Or you could mix and match some combination if you wish to do that. I would stand for questions at this point.
Any questions for staff on this?
I had a question. It's not. It's related to the 0.7%. So this is just tangentially related, and that is provided to the ticketing agencies, cultural agencies that we have in town. Is that correct?
I'm going to defer. It's a mix of purposes.
Yeah, Commissioners, 0.5% is used for marketing grant purposes to encourage overnight stays among those kind of the larger ticketed not-for-profit cultural entities, and then 0.2% goes into a pot for strategic marketing of activities in Kenwood and Oakdale parks.
And that 5.5% is the Stiefel included in that?
When you say included, do you mean eligible?
In that
or do you
group
mean have they been,
for marketing purposes?
They are, yeah, I believe they are. Yeah, they have submitted, I believe, in the past, and I believe been awarded grants. Yes,
okay,
I'm getting the nods. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions for staff?
Just a quick one, and that is on the charter ordinance that is sort of the overall umbrella of this particular resolution within it. We're basically just looking at putting an extension on this thing that is either in option A, a 20-year extension, or option B, no limit.
And
Would that be fair? I mean, and as far as the accommodations broker, is that the Visit Salina? Are they what's considered the accommodations broker?
Yes.
Okay. And so that's a whole different part of this thing, as to the ongoing who does what, who's administering the program, whatever. So if anything changes within anything else of this thing, we're still just looking at the operational dates of setting this on, which apparently can be changed at any time.
Excuse me, that's correct. As Mr. Franz indicated, if you could go ahead and put in essence, kind of a sunset on it today, but if you didn't, any commission, you or any commission afterward could stop it at any time. And when we're talking about the provision of the marketing Visit Salina type services, the Visit Salina division of the Chamber of Commerce is currently under contract with the city to provide those. And again, you have discretion with the proper notice and following the provisions of that to modify those terms or change that however you'd like.
Okay, so with that being said, I noticed that the staff recommendation is for the 20-year option, and is there any overriding reason for that? I mean, what is...
Actually, I'm not sure that the staff recommended one option over the other. It has provided some alternatives.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the options are thrown out there. There's not a recommendation with that.
Oh, okay. I was looking at options. I apologize. So, okay.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of recommendation then?
From a simplicity's sake, and given the fact that it's a simple action to modify it in the future, we don't really see a need to put an end date. And one reason is because at the end of 20 years, you're going to go back and be looking at improvements to the Bicentennial Center again, or for that matter, it could be other aspects of marketing your community, and you'll probably be looking to reallocate the use anyway. But certainly it doesn't inhibit any commission from modifying that if they should choose between now and any time in the future.
The only reason I like the sunset is it kind of reminds us that it's not just give me money, you know what I mean? That it reminds us that it is a tax, and that we know everything's paid for by tax up here, but it just is kind of we don't take it for granted any longer, sort of. It would be my attitude that we're just kind of reminded that these things tend to grow, and rarely do our prices go down, you know what I mean? I understand, and 20 years every now and again to take 10 minutes to discuss a tax isn't too much to ask. I don't think we're really streamlining future commissions. I would rather that, because I think we've sort of put on this end, don't worry about it. It just, then all of a sudden it's like, well, let's add that extra 1%, you know what I mean? And so that my take on it just is it's a little bit more, maybe seems a bit more responsible than Not that the other's irresponsible, but just maybe makes us a little more, I don't know, maybe, at least with me, I don't take it so much for granted that way when I realize, I'm actually renewing a tax here, and that means something, so. Hey, it's an election year. I got to look out for a few things here.
Might add, if I may, I suppose this is really an option 3.
Uh-oh.
That I think Mr. Franz and I recognized that we might have been viewing the objective a little bit differently. The two alternatives, the options you have before you now, speaks of that specific date of October 31, 2039, in anticipation of the levy then just ending at that point in time. I suppose there would be kind of an intermediary approach that if you wanted to sunset that 1% at that point in time and then bring it back to the 5.7% on an ongoing basis, that is what I suppose would be option 3, and I believe, frankly, I'll let Frank speak to it. I think that's what he was envisioning when he outlined his option to begin with.
Yeah.
I lost a little bit of that in the translation as in preparing the resolution.
He's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So we would be extending the 1% in this process, not the entire 6.7.
As you, that's correct, because the other's already set up to head that way. But as you think about that, it's one question usually prompts another question or an issue. And basically, if you allocate the full amount, you have 3% that supports the cost of the Visit Salina Convention and Tourism Agreement for the operations of that function. You have 2% that's there to support the operations of the Bicentennial Center. That was your 5% that you had for many years. You have an additional 1% to get you to 6% that is there to pay the debt service of the Bicentennial Center improvements for Heritage Hall and the upstairs meeting rooms. And then you have the 0.5% for the cultural marketing grants, and then the 0.2% for the Kenwood Oakdale Park marketing. That adds up to 6.7. So you can, as you consider whether if you would want to drop it down to something, those are all the pieces that are in place today, and you can decide if it's easier to drop it down to one of those pieces and which piece that would be, or not at all, or however you want to do that. But at least you know how each increment in the 6.7 is allocated today.
Is there a base allocated in the charter ordinance? Is that the 5? And then the other ones are by resolution?
The charter ordinance simply takes the state law limitation and restates that at 6.75 as being the current maximum under the charter ordinance. So it does not further delineate it beyond above 6.75.
Okay,
and as a matter of fact, I guess, is those delineations are all done outside of the resolution. I mean, the resolution does not say X% for this and X% for that. Those are all kind of traditional and by agreement with Visit Salina and other parties is the way that has been done.
Correct. And I offer that because if you, kind of following up from the mayor's thoughts on to bringing that down in the accountability, if you go from 6.7 to 5.7, we're at the end of 20 years, we're saying, okay, there's not an expectation for that 1% to be used in perpetuity for a similar or different use. But you could apply that same reasoning with a 0.5 increment, with a 0.2 increment, with a 2% increment, with a 3% increment. So the question is does it matter? Is it important? And if it is, to call the question on the number, which one do you want to fall to? Do you want to fall to just the 3%? Do you want to fall to the 5%? You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so it's important for you to at least know how the increments are allocated today. And again, your action today doesn't allocate the increments. You can reallocate those increments anytime in the future if you like, but it just tells you how they're allocated.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions for staff? Okay, any public comment on this? Okay. Bring it back to the commission for possible action.
So the action would be to continue this for 20 years, the way it's written now. Just
Does that,
because, just from the last conversation, I'm wondering if there is a, yeah.
Such that the 6.7 would continue until October 31, 2039, and it would stop. It would stop at that date and essentially go to zero unless levied at a different rate at that point in time or sometime in anticipation of that.
And that's, go ahead.
The second option, as stated, would simply set it at the 6.7 indefinitely. And then the third option that we mentioned, if you chose to, takes you back to option one, and then you could potentially add following that specific date to say that at which time the tax rate shall become blank. If you wish to take it down to a certain level beyond 2039.
My crystal ball's a little fuzzy after 5 years. So,
it gets out there.
And just as a matter of conversation, I see the mayor's point with, having that, but with the caveat that it can be changed at any time. I think it almost could even be looked at as, okay, we don't have to wait till 2039 to do this.
okay.
So, you know what I'm saying?
I'm easy good, as long as I argued that I was trying to be conscious with tax dollars, that's all that matters.
Okay.
In a day, we're going to spend 17 million,
Because it really is going to, the action at the time is going to be what's required for the time.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Although I think the mayor's point is well taken, and I'm sure 18 years from now, when people are looking for future money, someone will know that tax is going to expire. You might not need it at all, actually. Unlikely, but it's, on the other hand, you may need to increase it, but it certainly sets a roadblock. At least 20 years from now, if not done before, someone is going to look at this.
There's a lot of ways you can look at it. Usually when you talk about sunset, you're talking about a tax in which the citizenry has the ability to vote to continue, such as our sales tax. Okay. With this is clearly a tax. There's no question about that. But you could almost liken it to in a way to a water user fee.
Right.
You set the water rate, and you don't say, well, in year whatever, it's going to go backwards. Now, we do evaluate it each year, and with a change in the program, with a change in the capital improvement needs, the system needs, and so forth. But you don't automatically say it's going to go back because, quite honestly, there's an anticipation of a need, and you really don't know what that future would hold anyway. Right. So you just track it as you go, and if there's a change, you evaluate it at that time. So you could look at it either way. I think it's fair.
Okay. So
I'll defer to the more senior members of the commission.
I should have done that numerous times in my history. That would have been a good idea. Yeah.
Well, I would say if anybody wants to make a motion with the 20-year cap on it, they might not want to look to this end of the...
Well, no, if you have a different... I think what you're saying is if you've got a different idea, he's all ears. Is that what I gathered? Yeah.
And any of the options is certainly livable.
Personally, I like the annual review or semi-annual or every 5 years rather than having an end date. Right.
Okay. Seems fair. Okay. There you go.
Well, okay. Well, we can go ahead and float this thing then. Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve resolution number 14-7151 as submitted to modify the resolution to provide an indefinite extension to the 1% guest tax.
Second.
Motion is second to adopt resolution number 14-7151 with a modify the resolution to provide an indefinite extension of the 1% guest tax. Any further discussion? Oh,
Mayor,
sorry.
May I just to be sure for the purposes of the record and anybody looking at this in 2039,
For a total of 6.7%?
Am I correct that we were looking at the version that is labeled, I believe in your packet, as option 2, where section 2 of that ordinance says the transient guest tax rate shall remain at 6.7% until modified by the governing body of the city of Salina?
That,
Yeah, would it be appropriate to refer to that as, amend the motion to refer to it as option 2?
That would be fine
Okay.
if that's your wish.
So moved.
Second.
okay, motion and a second. So we need to
Thank you.
approve the modification or just as is, as now presented?
I think it's now presented as fine.
Okay. So with that modification, motion to approve the newly modified motion. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? That motion carries 4-0. Who's to 7-4?
Item 7.4, first reading, Charter Ordinance Number 38, a charter ordinance exempting the City of Salina, Kansas from the provisions of KSA 13-1024A and providing substitute and additional provisions on the same subject relating to general improvements and the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying for said improvements and repealing Charter Ordinance Number 34.
Greg, you're going to do this? Okay, there was a handoff off camera. The ball was tossed.
I think this actually will be somewhat of a tag team between the city manager and myself. I'll mention quickly, at your last meeting, we spoke of our discussions with bond counsel, and Mr. Gage might wish to comment on this, but I believe our recommendation now is that to be sure that we don't have any unanticipated consequences, that we would like to refrain from any effort to narrow your charter ordinance. The objective, as you might recall, was to try to avoid some of the overlap that kind of translated into the appearance of clash between our charter ordinance and other statutes that enable the utilization of bonds depending on the nature of the project. So the options you have before you today don't go there. They simply take what is the current charter ordinance and give you the opportunity to take two different approaches. The current charter ordinance has a category for public buildings. The first approach just takes the bond limit for that category of buildings to the $4.5 million level. The second option instead sets out a separate category for what is referred to as a recreational building, and then sets in that separate category the maximum per calendar year of $4.5 million. And as to the policy considerations between those two, that's, I think, more a matter that Mr. Gage might wish to speak to.
Basically, we felt that having a charter ordinance that, in essence, wasn't redundant in a lot of ways to authority already granted by state law was giving us more flexibility. But quite honestly, our bond counsel, when she looked at it, she indicated when you're dealing with land and improvements to the land, a new building, there could be a question when you issue bonds for a total project, the allocation to each of those, and it could create an oversight issue or being oversight of the how each of them add up, and that could create an issue in the future. So we looked at it, and the more I looked at it, I felt it was probably from my perspective, a little bit more stylistic, but quite honestly, when something like that doesn't make a tangible difference, without question, I felt there's certainly not a problem going along with bond counsel's guidance, because she may see deeper into that as she's dealt with those more specific issues with other communities than what we would. So that's what brought us back to this. So we're very comfortable with the two options. And again, one of them allows you to basically adjust the buildings amount. The other creates this special phrase for the what we call field house more practically. You'll see the animal shelter is deleted off of there in both of those because it is a building now. I mean, it was a building, and we said it really doesn't make sense to keep it separated. It's a building. And you'll also see a clarification with regards to, you'll see the change in order of stormwater drainage systems just because of how we've done this. It doesn't change any impact to that. It's a housekeeping item. And then in public parks, you'll see outdoor park because, again, parks doesn't need to address indoor buildings when indoor buildings are already addressed. So a little bit of cleanup with both of the options, but we're comfortable with either one. The simplistic way is to just change it for buildings because you may need it again later, and the more you carve it up, the more somebody later is going to say, well, I wonder why they carved it up, and we just would rather deal with it generally. But quite honestly, either one gets you to where you want to go.
Any questions for staff?
I just have a language question. I'm looking at the number 2 where it's looking at sort of identifying this more specifically, if that's an accurate way of putting that. And I forgot my glasses today, so bear with me a second here. I thought I heard mention here about on an annual basis. Was there a caveat in there on?
There's a third option. We didn't draw it up, but you could consider. And a third option is where you basically create a charter ordinance that allows you by, I believe, resolution annually to establish the amounts for each of the categories.
Okay.
And it's been used by at least one Kansas city to date. We really felt that with the conversation you've had towards more of a kind of more restrictive side of isolating public building for recreational purpose, that you probably didn't want to go even broader and add that to the end of the year things to do. But if you're interested in that, we could do that. We really didn't feel that came out of the conversation with the bond council, but it wasn't something that was discussed prior to, so we didn't want to just throw that out and surprise you.
Okay, well, I found it here, the calendar year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought
Yeah.
possibly your question related to that, and it's in that language between the categories, the identification of the categories and the monetary limits.
Because my concern on that thing would be that I know that the idea, and when we're looking at this here and now, we would see the $4.5 million obviously as in aggregate of building and property and so on. But would down the road that be possible to say, well, we'll acquire the property in one year and do the building in a separate year?
Yes. And I apologize for misunderstanding your question, because when we talked with bond counsel, they made it clear, and as you see here, the authority that you need to get is in essence garner away from state law through this deals with the amount actually issued in the calendar year. And quite honestly, what typically happens, Rod could tell you, is from a technical perspective, you can authorize a project that could be a very large cost project, say $10 million, just for a nice round easy number, but you might actually issue. The actual bonds might be issued in over a 3-year, 4-year period with smaller increments. So there's a lot of options in issuance, but when you get down to the weeds of this, it's the issue that you're charting out of is the amount of bonds actually issued for a project in a calendar year, not even the total amount of debt for a project in a calendar year. And again, the reason for that is because the whole purpose of the charter ordinance is to give you discretion that was taken away non-uniformly by the state legislature. And so that's why it's a specific point. Otherwise, we would look at it as kind of trivial. But the short answer to your question is yes, you could divide up. You could do land in one year, you could do building in another year.
So this could be, even though, say, this one is $4.5 million, and we have sort of a framework of an agreement on this thing, in the future it could be a $9 million project over 2 different bond issues. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's a lot of money.
What kind of is our safeguard against that happening?
The safeguard is that the electorate of the city of Salina elects good, honest people like they have historically, and you make good decisions based on the need for the facility, based on the financial performance, and so forth. The safeguard is you.
I don't know if you saw the last election results. I'm starting to have some doubts as to...
Yeah. Keep in mind, with a lot of the...
if you saw the election results when I got in office, I don't know if I'd have too much faith in them, but yeah.
Yeah. Keep in mind the state law only restricts you in just a handful of areas. Otherwise, you're not restricted at all. You could issue all the debt that you can afford to pay off. The key is not necessarily how much debt you issue. It's about what your revenue source is to make sure you pay that off. so that you don't create a problem in the future. And that's where staff comes in to help you with matching that up.
Well, I kind of fall on this particular one. I think I'm kind of with the rest of you guys on, like with the last issue, and that is that whereas I see that option 1 would be a lot easier for future commissions to do building projects and so on, I see that option 2 kind of almost is a more deliberative process, that you kind of have to go through a change in the charter ordinance once again. And I think that this probably does, and option 2 probably does the better job of addressing our current needs. Would that be accurate with either you or any of you guys up here? Or?
No, either addresses your current needs. The only difference is option 1, because you deal with buildings. If you're going to build other buildings in the future, which odds are you probably wouldn't hit that anyway. But if you needed it, it's there. Otherwise, what would the commission do? They would do another charter ordinance. And quite honestly, as long as it's a building that the community probably desires to see for whatever the purpose is, maybe it's a public works facility, as long as you have the proper funds without taking away the core services to pay the debt off, it's going to be probably a non-issue.
So is the real concern here, I mean, and going back, and I knew you were talking a little about this earlier, so option 3 wouldn't be to simply say a maximum over any extended time for any one project would be $4.5 million. You thought that was an issue with what the state or with our bond council
suggested? The bond council suggested, and I misunderstood the question. The bond council had, because I thought I may have mentioned that before, bond council had suggested that they have seen in Kansas and felt comfortable with a city that had a charter ordinance that allows you to set the amounts each year, and then you turn around and do that annually by resolution, was my understanding. We really saw that going the opposite direction of where you wanted to go here, so that's why we didn't surprise you with an option that we thought might be confusing, and why I wouldn't have even talked about it if I didn't think that's what you were asking me about.
So my concern is, or my thoughts are, is the best safeguard is to simply say that any given project has a 4, and I understand what they're saying, where bond council's going, but I would tend to think credit rating people might look at you as a little bit more safer city. I'm not saying they do, to say, hey, these guys just don't open up the purses every year for $4.5 million to their people. I mean, I think these numbers are set in place, are a good set of numbers, and as I look back across all of these other ordinances, they pretty clearly spell out what these things are for. I feel like this opens up the cash door and frankly allows there to be a commissioner or 3 dropped in a situation like this to push through a pet project, because let's face it, a lot of people don't get out a vote, and you do hope that there's the honesty. Salina wouldn't be the only community to have one issue people put into offices. I can remember back when the mall was being built in South Salina, and there were people elected who most people looked at and said, what? That person's in office? For a specific reason of voting no against those issues. So it does happen. And I fear that when we put that $4.5 million out there, it's a very real possibility that a project could come along. I'm not saying that is going to happen, but it could. And I think limiting the scope, as these previous charter ordinances have, as much as we can, ensures that this particular issue, I know we've got, this one is relatively covered, but something like this coming down the road doesn't just get shoved through. That's a lot of money for the people in Salina to keep. I mean, we spend that money all the time on, I shouldn't say all the time, but I mean, water lines, it's $1.5 million here, $2.5 million here, but this seems like a little bit more of the I want category than I need category. And while I think the city as a general whole may want, we have to watch how much wants we start getting to before we get ourselves into real trouble. And I would just be more for trying to limit the scope if this doesn't in any way make it harder for us to do things or doesn't make bond council look at us strangely. I just would like to limit this a lot more. I just feel like that's just kind of opening up the pocketbooks to saying, okay, it's here. And I know you're saying the commission has to approve it, but
I don't see it as changing the way you think about things. So I was leaning towards option 1 and making it more of an umbrella, because anytime we're going to spend $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, you're darn tootin' we're going to be deliberating about it. Long and hard. I mean, we've been talking about this one for a long time.
We are.
And yes, that's right. But
maybe not the next 3 or 4 or 5 people.
But if another commission comes along and they happen to be free spenders or whatever, they're still going. They can make a decision as easily as we're making this decision.
I mean, that's true. That's true. I think it makes it a little bit harder for them. I think they need to stand up here and justify it a little bit better than, oh, hey, those guys before us put it in place. You know, I don't want somebody attaching this thing to my name 10 years from now when they're spending 4 years worth of $4.5 million, $18 million, and say, oh, householder approved it way back when, it's okay, you know? I don't know, it just feels like the others, when I look back and I see these other ones, they sure seem a lot more narrow than what we're
But
looking at
then you
here.
have to deal with housekeeping from year to year.
Yeah,
Then you
4.5
have to take the animal shelter off. Then you have to take Kenwood Cove off. Then you have to, you know.
No, I hope we're not spending $4.5 million every year, I guess is my point. But I mean, it's totally up to you guys. I'm just saying my comfort point would like this a little more narrow than the opposite. But
I got a quick question on this, and since Commissioner Crawford isn't here, I think she might have been getting to some of this last week in the other discussion. My question would be this, is that this is kind of narrowly tailored. I mean, the reason why we're having this discussion is because of the downtown rec center. And my question is this. Let's just say for whatever reason, market conditions, the project doesn't happen. We've passed an ordinance that's approved for basically nothing, other than now you've got a jumped up limit. Is there any way of putting anything in here that were to say, if that for whatever reason didn't happen after a certain point, that this would revert back to where it is now?
I don't think you can put a reversion clause in
Is
the
that
ordinance.
possible?
I'd have to look at Greg. You could certainly go back and modify it again. I'm not sure.
Well,
I'll be honest, it's an interesting conversation to hear you talk about distrusting yourselves, the future versions of yourselves.
yeah.
Well,
that's true.
When this issue
Yeah,
is
I don't
really
think George
between-
Washington's in office right now.
The interesting
Yeah.
thing is
Yeah.
the state of Kansas is one of the states in which it may not seem like it when you spend all your time in the state, but for the most part, they allow local governments to govern themselves about home rule authority to make the decisions you want to make, knowing that you are responsible to your electorate. Okay, so, and that's what, when we're talking about this, that's the context of it. It's really not protecting us from future bad commissions or whatever that would be. It's really about taking discretion that the state, some years ago, is somewhat, or I'd call it somewhat arbitrarily, tried to take and make non-uniform, and taking that back so that you can make those decisions as a commission, and future commissioners can make those answering to your electorate. That's really what it's for.
Okay, but what was our amount beforehand? 250,000? What was it, like, what, like 750?
Yeah.
750 to $4.5 million is a huge jump. And to leave it open, that's a lot for me.
1 million, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you authorized $4 million for a revolving loan fund application for water and sewer lines, so it's all about the topic. We don't
Right.
build buildings very often.
Right.
And there's nothing evil about buildings.
No, not at all.
If we need them.
Except you gotta maintain 'em.
We
Yeah.
have a public works facility that's very old and very fragmented in how it's laid out, and ideally, you'd have a new public works facility, and quite honestly, you'd probably go beyond that and look at parks and other maintenance and see how
Sure.
those could complement. But that's an expensive project, that's why it hasn't been done. So it's just a
If
flavor
you look
issue.
at Charter Ordinance number 34 for the aquatic park, which of these current options would that have fallen under? You know, the way ordinance,
one?
Charter Ordinance number
2, option 2.
Really neither.
Well, they would have specified.
Number 34.
Number 30 for the, because it was, looks like the aquatic park was carved
the
out
aquatic
It was
separately,
Number two.
specified as a
Yeah,
separate
and
thing.
everything else was left at $1 million.
Yeah, that was the decision, and you can see the pattern was there's been a pattern of decision, and I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's truly a flavor issue, a stylistic issue. But rather than to look at broader segments, there's been a desire that, well, we have a project now. We haven't paid any attention to these things for years and years and years, especially buildings. So we have a project, and so let's just address it to the project and create the project versus to address the bigger question, so that later, if you have a project in the same category, you don't have to go back and do it again. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. But again, the concept of it is you're giving yourself what I would say is a discretion as a commission, and for future commissions to make decisions that are somehow inhibited and handcuffs are put on you from the state legislature. That's the relationship, but it doesn't really matter. Either way, you can do what you need to do here.
Now, the other difference, though, is that while we could allocate any amount of money, anything above this limit has to go to a vote. And really what we're doing now for a very sensible timeline and other reasons is shortening the process. I mean, if time was not an issue, we could set any amount and lobby for it and get it passed through.
Yeah, that's correct. And in other states, in surrounding states, I don't know what they do in Colorado, although they probably have to go to a vote for the revenue side. I don't know about the debt. Missouri and Oklahoma today, if you are a governing body in one of those states, if you want to issue bonds and if you want to raise taxes to pay for something, both of those have to go to a vote of the public. And you think to yourself, well, okay, that's fine, and that's all where you stand on the spectrum. You think, well, that's okay, that's fine. So you have two questions for one issue many times. You have the bonds and you have the tax. Okay, so what typically happens? A lot of the times the tax doesn't pass and the bonds do. Doesn't make any difference.
Right.
And because it creates confusion with everything. So historically, cities like to take any of the discretion that's given to them and believe that they're good people and that they can make good decisions with good information from staff. And it doesn't really matter. And in this case, it doesn't matter because you have so many other categories. You don't have that limitation. And a public vote on the bonds, it just gives you the authority to issue bonds for that purpose. If you want to do pay-as-you-go, you don't go to a vote to the public. If you want to raise a property tax to pay for it, you don't go to a vote of the public. You do for sales tax, but not property tax. You have a lot of other discretions on actually more important questions than simply issuing the bonds. But as I mentioned before, it really is a stylistic thing. Either way, you satisfy the need for this particular project. It just depends if you want to do it from a general perspective in a category, whether you just want to isolate it. It doesn't really make a difference. It doesn't make a difference in bond rating. Bond rating is simply when you issue and they come and look at your finances and your economy, that your economy's strong and you've got good money in the pot and you're able to pay for it, and they can, that's your bond rating. It's not about your authority to issue. So it really doesn't affect any of those tangible things.
This is my concern is that with that caveat in there that this is open to a protest per se. I just want to make sure that we're not providing some sort of unintended backlash against some sort of perception that, oh, well, this is carte blanche and they wanted a rec center and we're opening the door for anything now. That's my main concern, is just that I think that we've identified the need, that it is a rec building, that it is the thing. We've made the commitment last week to go into this public-private partnership. I think it's a win-win for everybody, even beyond that, and I won't go into the win-win-win-win type thing, but I think there are a lot of upsides to this, and I just want to be careful that we don't give a reason out there to have people not trust or be able to be on board fully with. Our intention is to do a rec center. We want to do this rec center. We want it to be successful. We obviously, I don't think, would want to change a charter ordinance and have it a successful protest. That's not a very good thing. So I just want to make sure that we're doing this charter ordinance amendment in a way that allows for the most level of success from the project itself. And so with that whole thing about my question before, which the answer was no, there's really no way to safeguard is there anything, knowing that that's a possibility, that one might be a better option than the other? And is there something that I'm thinking about that maybe being more specific on it would be perceived in a completely different way?
I'll try to answer that and a couple other points, if I may. The mentioning the kind of the conditional approval or handling that, the problem is, as you would imagine, with charter ordinances or any ordinances, any time you enact an ordinance that's subject to a future condition of some sort, it's difficult. The status of the ordinance kind of comes into question. I do think that certainly the extent to which you specifically identify the project, I mean, we can go as broad or as narrow as you wish to go in terms of identification of the specific project, either by description, location, whatever. That's what's entirely within your discretion. The 2 points I was going to make, the reason we put the history of that state statute in the blue sheet was, as you may have noticed, it was enacted in 1955, and those original limits of 100,000 are still in place because it's one of those statutes that was determined early on to be non-uniformly applicable. It's inherently non-uniformly applicable because under, you might have noticed, the 13, it's in Chapter 13, which means it applies only to cities of the first class. So right out of the blocks, cities started using charter ordinances to customize their approach to this question. So the legislature has been able to pretty well just leave it alone, knowing that cities of the first class were designing their own approach to this subject. And that was the other reason I suggested putting the history in, and the city manager concurred that it might be beneficial for you to see how that has progressed over the years, even here in Salina, Kansas. So this same process is happening all over the state in cities of the first class. It's just a matter of what you choose to do. And as I say, back to my earlier point, we can go as broad or as narrow in terms of the project or in terms of calendar year, whatever, by project. I think we can do whatever you wish in that regard. We would simply match notes with bond counsel, explain what your objectives are, and just make sure that they can always write that opinion letter that says that we legitimately are authorizing bonds under whatever the final language is.
I guess I lean towards Commissioner's discussion as far as not leaving the door terribly wide open. And I don't know if any of these options, if the charter ordinance number 34, you know, if that wording was just changed to substitute the field house and the dollar figure and left that the same, that gives us the project we want, and you know, certainly ease fears that there's a extra $3.5 million that could be spent without a vote floating around. Granted, if there's something that costs $10 million that we need, we'd obviously come back and
Right.
do what we need it to do.
And that goes more where my feelings are, that if there's a project that we really need, it's just as easy to come back and ask for that money versus leaving the door open. I think you were kind of hitting on it, but less blunt about it, and I'll take that role. And basically, what you were saying earlier, it could be the public could lose more trust in us if we basically, for this reason, they may think that this has all been orchestrated by us. They were never going to raise that money over there. So now all you've done is open up the door, and you're giving them $4.5 million this year. Next year you need $4.5 million. Now we're paying for the whole thing. People may not mind. I'm not saying that they mind. I mean, I'm characterizing. People may be great. You should have paid $9 million from the beginning. We've needed this since day one. I don't want to cast a negative light on the project because maybe that's the general consensus of people, that we need it and they don't care if we spend $9 million. I'm just a little concerned because this came about because we came to an agreement that we thought was workable on a public-private basis, and I just want to make sure that the door does slam shut after $4.5 million. That I don't like that number hanging out there for the city to do. If we have this big city public works building, well, there's going to be a need. People are going to know it. The 5 people sitting up here are going to be up here as part of their day-to-day operations and say, we got to do it. They're going to spend the money. I just don't like the idea of leaving that open and being able to spread a project over years like that so easily. I think it needs to be a lot more, and I think it puts, like I said, it puts the trust of the people back in that we know we're not being hoodwinked into something up here, that we know that we're looking out for this, that, yeah, boy, they got you, you know, that's how they saw you.
And just by way of clarification, I don't think that, at least for myself, that wasn't the issue. My issue was that if the project didn't happen, I mean, I think that we have safeguards in place through our development agreement process that we've established that if that were to be the case, that wouldn't happen. I mean,
this one.
There wouldn't be an agreement. Right. Well, I just mean in general that, I mean, I think that this, my concern is mostly around, is option 1 or option 2 have any bearing whatsoever on our ability to really go out and sell this thing and not have any unintended backlash against thinking that, well, now it's open for an expo center building or anything else like that. Right. I mean, it's just, I like that we have a development agreement concept put into place that we're completely covered by sort of all that, and that we all want this this public-private partnership. My concern is basically, does one provide any more ammunition if someone wanted to go out and create a petition against this thing versus the other one?
Yeah, I think if somebody doesn't like something, they go and find their ammunition. You don't have to create it for them. My thinking is, listening to you, it sounds like 3 out of the 4 of you kind of like to stay on the conservative side and keep it related to the project type. And so given that, I would tell you option 2 sounds like your option.
But should even be narrowed more to say field house type structure is my concern.
I think our development agreement kind of covers that, wouldn't?
Yeah, then you might as well put a definition in, and you're expanding this to more than what it's intended.
But here's my problem with what you're saying, and I don't know what the legalities of this are. Say this one doesn't go through, they drop it 6 months later, they say, here's our new plan, and you're now in a new development agreement.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Commissioners, I would tell you this. If the city government ever goes against the public sentiment to that degree, the public has a means to correct you.
Yeah.
I just keep that in mind. I don't see that being a safeguard issue to worry about. The public has a means to put you where they want you to be if you step out too far. So I wouldn't be too concerned with that. And if you say a field house, well, what's a field house? What does that mean? Can you not do other recreational stuff in a field house? Is it all field house, 70%, 80%? You can see the issues and how to define that. And then all of a sudden, you've taken a phrase, and then you're going to have to define it with about 6 paragraphs to do that. And that's really not how this, it's not to say you couldn't structure it this way, it's just not how it's done. I wouldn't be concerned with that.
Well, Family Aquatic Park didn't seem like it needed a whole bunch of definition. I mean, I don't know. It's up to you guys. I would want it to be as narrow as possible, and I've said my bit on it, so you guys may have a better idea. We know.
But let me ask this from the other side. Is there any reason why 2 wouldn't be as good as 1?
2 works.
Other than the fact that if somebody did want to do a public works building down the road, they'd have to pretty much come back and do the same process we're doing now.
Here's likely how the public would probably respond. On one side, if you raise the building, oh, well, yeah, they may go out and do another project someday, and that wasn't what I was looking at this for. The other side of it is if you decide to just do the process and just isolate it to a particular project, they might say, oh, they'll probably done what they did in the past, and they'll just run another charter ordinance that'll make it through. So, either way, the public, there are different ways the public can get in and tell you what to do or what not to do. I think if you're comfortable with 2, 2's a fine option. I think 2 works great.
I'm comfortable with 2 at this time for this project. I mean, and it may well be in the next 6 months, may realize, well, we need to go back and change that thing permanently. But
well, if you do that, who's to say you don't know what happens in the next 6 months? Do you want to make it more difficult if it comes back again later if the sentiment's really close? The interesting thing is, and you guys know this being elected, is that it would be ideal, like a video game, to know exactly what the public sentiment is on every item that you deal with. But the problem is we all get a feel from the people that are around us, but we really don't have a real idea of what 47,707 people in our community really think. We don't really know. Most of the time, you probably guess right, and every once in a while you get surprised, so you really don't know. But if, like I said, if you're in disagreement with them strongly, they have the means to correct you.
Right.
Just a quick reminder that in the case of a charter ordinance such as this, there is an extraordinary majority requirement of a 2/3 vote, which would also apply in this first reading scenario. So
I'm sure we'll get it hammered out.
Well, I just want to make sure we're all
well, I think we all want to see the particular project come to fruition. I think our concern is potentially other projects or.
Well, I appreciate the answers, because I tell you, I think I could go either way on this, because my main concern is that we maintain transparency and trust, and I don't have a problem with people knowing that they can trust the people that they elect into office. My main concern was just I don't want any unintended consequences of doing one versus the other, and so I'm satisfied that 1 probably accomplishes what 2 does without any extraordinary difficulties on that. And quite frankly, it might be more advantageous as to, if you look at, if there were a likelihood for it to go to a public vote, that you'd have to come back for round 2 if you went with option 2 versus option 1. So,
I'm sorry, explain that one too.
well, just in that, I think if you go more narrow, that might be the thing that receives the challenge. And without knowing, then if you came back and said, well, let's look at a different
I would
way
think
to do
people
that.
who might be against the field house would probably also be against giving us $4.5 million to spend for any other project that didn't require a vote.
Right.
Is that-
Right, but I'm looking at that from the other side that says, if it's not an issue, then you don't have to take that next step when the need might arise for something else that is needed. That makes sense.
Well, I think the public would like to have discussion probably on whatever else is going to fit in that 3.5 million. I just see that, and I understand 4.5 doesn't buy you as much as it did 20 years ago. Neither does $1 million.
Okay.
But I see it as a big increase that, it's sort of like I view it as a line of credit sitting out there.
Okay.
And it's the public's perception of what we would do with that.
So more of
Credit.
an option 2, is that kind of where you're?
Personally, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm leaning a little bit too, a little bit more narrow. Did we open, speaking of public, did we open this up to the public
Not
yet?
yet.
Is there anyone from the public who wants to speak? Maybe you can clarify this for us all. You can get it. Anyone?
Like an economist.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, right. So, and I think it's a good point. I think it still just lets the public know that I get what you're kind of saying, the challenge a little bit, but I still think it lets them know that we're trying to be a little bit more cautious about raising this. I mean, I'm not, well, whatever.
Well, we are raising it.
We are. I mean,
And there's no magic about 500,000 or $1 million. I mean, to me, every number out there is a lot. Why don't we just make it $50,000, because that's a lot of money to me.
well, it is. I think what happens, though, if you have a credit card and you have a $1,000 limit, you tend to spend under $1,000. If all of a sudden you got a credit card with a $5,000 limit, especially when it's not your money, so to speak, it's a lot
Well-
easier to spend $5,000. I think I've heard that the most inefficient way to spend money is to spend taxpayers' money on what you think they want. So, I mean, anything that we can do to sort of continue to kind of keep the brakes on us and make things more narrow, I think is always a good idea. And so I see what you're saying. The numbers are random, but when you got the number, it's a little easier to say, it's discretionary. Granted, if we don't have it, we can't spend it. I mean, but it's just a little easier to make your wants become needs, if you will, when you've got that money out there. It's kind of like that sunsetting dollar. When you just kind of forget it and it's just out there, you tend to take it for granted and you're not so conscious about it. And maybe it's a subconscious thing, but it works for me to tell me I don't have it. I just learn not to spend it. So.
Just because I have $250,000 worth of credit available to me doesn't mean I'm looking to spend it tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah, personally.
Yeah, well,
I look at city business the way I look at personal
yeah, well,
business.
And I hope that the future commissions up here would feel the same way. I worry.
Just a theoretical question about the $1 million. If you look at ordinance number 34, those items that are captured under the $1 million, streets, bridges, viaducts, parks, buildings, stormwater drainage systems, do those nowadays cost under $1 million? When you look at the things that are limited, looking from the other side, are we actually handicapped with the $1 million? I mean, I don't think we voted, well, not this year, but let's say did the water pipes have to go for public vote?
Commissioners, most of your street-type work and bridge-type work are going to be part of the main traffic way, or would be on a main traffic way, and you're exempt from that. So that's why you don't typically see that being an issue every year, is because we're mostly working on our arterials and the streets that would fall under the statutory requirement for main traffic way. But no, if you really look at your street projects, you've got the We've got many South 9th phases. You've got South Ohio, East Magnolia. You've got, coming up, you're going to have North Ohio. You're going to have Iron Street. You've had the North Ohio overpass. All those are more than $1 million. So all of those, but you're talking about projects on main roads that are going to meet the main trafficway aspect. And again, that's an exemption that says you don't have to do all that, because the whole point of this, again, is giving you freedom from state law. They provide certain exceptions anyway. That's one of them, so therefore you haven't had to use this tool. Now, if you were going to spend more than $1 million on a residential street, perhaps, then we might be talking about this.
And this thing needs a clean sweep, just for clarification, right? It's a clean sweep, but it's a majority of the board, not a majority of the quorum.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a two-thirds majority of the seated commissioners.
All right. Well, we can make this real simple right away. I'm ready to make a motion, and we'll see if this one gets 4, and if it's not, then we'll see how the next one goes. So, Mr. Mayor, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve Charter Ordinance number 38 with option number 1 on first reading. Option number 1 being without the more general and non-specific.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second to adopt Charter Ordinance number 38 with option number 1 version of the proposed amendment. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
But keep talking, you might convince.
Looks like you have one option left if you're going to go forward.
Yeah.
We can make that. I can make that option unless somebody else wants to make the motion. I'll make the motion to approve Charter Ordinance number 38 with option number 2 on first reading.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve Charter Ordinance number 38 with option number 2. Any further discussion?
Discussion.
Okay, sure.
I like option number 1, but we can get by with option number 2. So I'm not going to slow the train down.
Yeah.
Just to make a point.
Well, we better get some money in this thing, or we spent the last few weeks not wasting our time. So, okay. Any further discussion other than that? Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries 4-0. Okay. Takes us to, I believe, other business. Anybody have any fun stuff? No? How about anybody with any unfun stuff?
Hey, thank you to everybody that did work on that project. I know the conversation was long, but hopefully it was meaningful. So, thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to need a little guidance on time here, and also that I have the right language here for what we need to do, okay?
I believe you're talking about the motion for the executive session?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have, I believe, for both trade secrets and legal. Time, what's the number we have right now out there? 30? I would say 45 is probably going to be more realistic.
45?
You gotta love this.
Okay, we're going to do 45, and then we'll give 5 minutes for a small break. And
Sure.
action after this? No?
No, we don't expect
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I move to recess into executive session for 45 minutes to discuss with legal counsel matters subject to the attorney-client privilege for the reason that public discussion of these matters would waive the privilege and adversely affect the city's interest in the matters, and to discuss confidential data relating to the financial affairs and trade secrets of a corporation for the reason that public discussion of the information would competitively disadvantage the corporation, and reconvene at 6:45 p.m.
Second.
Motion and second to move into executive session for 45 minutes after a 5-minute break. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries 4-0. After 5 minutes, we'll be in executive session.
Of all things considered. 1-800-RADIO-KS.
There we go. Now we need $900. $900 away
Great, $900.
from complete